take the time with scaling. That's such an important thing. Don't worry about tacking on as much processing as possible if guys are promising you that.
So welcome everybody to another episode of Uncensored Direct Marketing. Today I have Chad Hamzeh. He's a former professional MMA fighter. Chad has basically lived, I wouldn't say 9 lives, but at least 5. He has, pretty much conquered e-commerce business, or I should say direct response business. He's generated over $150 million for merchants, vendors, and e-commerce businesses. And 90 million of that is actually for his own in-house properties. So Chad, welcome. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Oh, pleasure to be here. Thanks, Maria. Appreciate it.
Awesome. So as I was saying, Chad, and we were talking a little bit as we were getting to know each other, you've had so many different experiences in direct response, of course. I mean, you've done, traffic, affiliate marketing, all, email, all that stuff. But I did want to just quickly give everybody a little bird's eye view of, your past. And, obviously it's very interesting. You are a former MMA fighter, and then you went into, direct response. So I'm curious on, how your career started in direct response and what happened before then.
Yeah, for sure. So basically I started, I was a business analyst when living in Canada. So I moved, well, we'll get there in a second. So back in Canada in the early 2000s, I was a business analyst at a telecom, and I had been fighting and training MMA and whatnot since like 2001. It's something I'd always wanted to do all my life, ever since I saw like Bloodsport with Jean-Claude Van Damme, like back when I was 8 years old. So that was always the dream, to do that, and all that sort of stuff. But you had to pay bills and all that. So I was like a business analyst, and I talked to my wife in around 2007 or so. And, I'm like, we're not really doing what, I'd like to do and, what you like to do. So why don't we just go somewhere where we can train full time? Cause she was into that stuff as well. So it was kind of like, well, we didn't have a lot of money at the time. So it's like, where can we go where, we can train full time and not really have to work much and, not go broke. So we moved to Thailand. We were there in Thailand for about a year, 2008 to 2009. And it was awesome. Like one of the best years of our lives. We did get broke still. We didn't really have much money there either, but, you can live a lot easier back then in Thailand. So, training, fighting full time, just living the life and all that. At the beginning of 2009, my dad got sick. And so, I had to, move back to Canada to take care of him. Cause he was going to be living with us. My parents were separated. So it was basically like a couple of months before moving back, it was kind of like, okay, I don't want to go back into a cubicle type of thing. And, I gotta be at home to take care of my father and all that. So I was basically like the guy who typed into Google how to make money online. Like that was essentially how I started learning. And you can imagine, especially back then when compliance was a lot lighter ad platforms, like the amount of
old days, Chad, the good old days.
Of course. Yeah, for sure. No, I hear you there. But just the rabbit hole of just junk that I went down to try to learn stuff. So that was like really how I got into it, and it's, I ended up stumbling upon PPC Coach. It was a old forum way back in the day that taught PPC. And, what's interesting is a lot of the guys that you see these days, like the Stack That Money guys and a lot of these other guys who are teaching or have gone on, a lot of them started there as students. And, we just all learned different kind of pay-per-click strategies and all that sort of stuff. So that was essentially it. I mean, I started June 6th, 2009, because that was the first day I got back. And I was like, I need to make some money fast. Right. And my wife was the one who went back to work, and now she was pregnant, and she was actually carrying us for quite some time while I could do this. And I would teach some privates here and there and that sort of stuff for fighting. And yeah, I think I had my first 6-figure month about 3 to 4 months in.
Oh, that's not bad. I mean, that's pretty quick.
I was just grinding. Like I was launching tons of campaigns every day. And frankly, it was like, I had to make it work. I funded, people were like, oh, how did you fund it? I'm like, debt. Yeah. I just went in, I just went like 20 grand and 30 grand in debt on my credit card to just pay for ads and buy data and learn it that way. That was pretty much it. I mean, that's how I got into it.
Wow. Did you find, I mean, you kind of like went quickly, you got into six figures quite quickly. Usually people take a couple of years. It could take, months, everybody's different and obviously the skill set. So do you find like if you were to start today with that same journey, do you think it would be as quick, your ascent to six figures?
If I was starting from scratch, like without any knowledge, I think it'd be easier. Now.
Really? Okay. I like to hear that.
Well, so here's the thing. From a compliance standpoint, it'd be a lot harder right now. But just from a learning standpoint and training, there's just so much more info. Like you didn't have a lot. Like we had that forum. We didn't have YouTube videos and tons of stuff to teach you like how to run ads, how to start a drop shipping store, how to start an e-com. You didn't have any of that. It was just like most of the guru stuff was not really good or real or really didn't do much. And so we were just all in this forum learning, like just testing and stuff. So it wasn't really, so I think now still easier.
Okay. I mean, I like to hear that because I do hear a lot of people, a lot of people there's always this, like, I missed the boat. I missed the boat on crypto. I missed the boat on direct response. I missed there's always this air of like, oh, it's too late for me now. So it's nice and refreshing to hear that it's in direct response, 10 years, I consider a veteran in this industry is saying, you know what? No, it would probably be easier now. And I agree because, when I got into the game in like 2006, in the adult space, it was really difficult to recruit affiliates, and it was really difficult to pay them. You just paying affiliates was like a full-time job, like figuring out like how to get money to this person and that person. And people don't realize it. There's always this like, well, no, there was less people, less competition. I kind of disagree with that because I feel like, if you're good at what you do and like you studied, you kind of put the work in, you figure it out. You know what I mean? If you have more resources, but I guess to each their own. But I find that interesting and it's uplifting for young people to hear like, hey, you got a lot more stuff that's available to you now and you can do it. So I'm curious to know, like, your first venture, you said you made your six figures after a couple of months. Was in affiliate marketing?
Yeah, correct. And I just want to add something real fast to what I just said. These days you have far more support structure. That's the difference. Back then, from a competition standpoint, and from a compliance standpoint, for sure, yes, it was easier. And in that respect, from just a money hustle mindset, it was easier in that regard. But if you go into these days and you try to build something real, like even if you're simply an affiliate, but you're building a real operation, in my opinion, it's easier now because of the support structure. Okay. Back then, you were like often on your own in a lot of ways. So just wanted to add to that. But yeah, so I started out as an affiliate. A lot of it was health related stuff. Some of it was like car insurance type things, lead gen, that sort of stuff. But yeah, I started out as an affiliate, and I was strictly an affiliate from 2009 to about 2012, around the 2013. But yeah, so I mean, in 2012, I came out because I realized there wasn't a lot of training back then. There wasn't a lot that was done by legit affiliates. So I came out with a program that was called Traffic Black Book, and it got very popular at the time, and tons of people loved it. And I came out with the second version in 2013. But other than that, I was strictly an affiliate for like about the first 4 years of my career. Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, the affiliate space really, took off, I think, in those years. And, even I think buying traffic was the one thing it was a lot cheaper than it is now. Right. So that was one opportunity, obviously, that you had. You had the opportunity, like right now, US traffic is obviously like gold and everything else. If you can make it in another market, it's really good. So when you stop the affiliate space, I guess you saw an opportunity for you to create your own offer after you've learned a considerable amount of what, what everybody else was doing. Can you tell me about your first couple of offers? Like, what did you decide to launch? How did you go about it?
Yeah, for sure. So first off, I never stopped the affiliate business. I still have it actually. It's just evolved a lot over time. But in 2013, I started taking on some clients as an agency of sorts in a way. And so the original VSL offers, those video sales letter offers, like the early ones back in for health and that sort of thing around 2013, we actually became like the biggest traffic source, like always top 1 to 3 traffic sources for those. Nice. So generating like, 40, 50,000 a day for these clients. And so that was actually, it was like an agency model, and it was pretty cool because it was just a lot of liquid. Like we brought in a lot of cash doing that. We didn't really have any expense. We were just getting a % of ad spend, and we were just scaling these offers really big. And so the way that I ran it was I was already buying affiliate traffic. And what I did is I would just take on these clients that had similar offers to what we were running as affiliates. And I would just go to like large sites at the time, Yahoo, you'd go and do a display buy on Yahoo. So I would just buy a big block of ad space, and I would rotate the client's offers into that ad space. So I already knew the traffic converted, and I was already monetizing it, and I would just fill in their offers into that ad space. So if we could keep scaling, we were always running at high scale because of that. So then I was like, I'm running traffic for a lot of these, and I was approached by one of the networks that we were running traffic with. And the guy asked me, hey, have you ever thought of doing a trial offer, like running your own offer and that sort of thing? And I was like, yeah, I have thought of it. I've heard it's a pain in the ass. So I just kind of avoided it for now. And they're like, no, we can kind of help build that out for you and this sort of stuff. And so that was actually the first thing we did. We did some diet offers in the Canadian market. We started in 2014. And that was around the same time I started a very large publishing site. So that's a problem I've had, which I tell people don't do, is like, I'll run like 3-4 different businesses at one time. I usually tell people just focus, and then I go do the opposite, which is not ideal when you're running things at like, 8 figures plus scale. Right. So, yeah. But that was the first time I started in the offer game, was in the trial space.
Okay. Well, I mean, that's a treasure trove of questions right there. The trial offer space and so forth. You did mention that you ran it in the Canadian market. You didn't want to do something, like you didn't want to kind of go bigger into the US. Why'd you choose Canada?
So I was still living in Canada at the time. And so I moved to the US early 2014. So I didn't have, around the same time, like a month after I started the trial. So I didn't have a lot of US processing capability. Keep in mind, like I was, I didn't know a lot about processing at the time. Right? I just kind of, again, just like how I learned PPC, I kind of figured this all out. So it's basically being in Canada, I started with international mids, like merchant accounts.
Okay.
So I didn't have signers, and there's a whole bunch of stuff we could talk about. I didn't have any. You didn't have
the infrastructure basically.
Correct,
to support. Okay.
I didn't have the infrastructure.
Well, Chad, we met like 8 years too late then. You should have contacted me. I could have helped you out with that. Yeah. It's obviously now, even on the merchant account side, all roads always, every offer, anything you do, it always kind of, it's funny because, I started the podcast and it's like, I work in merchant accounts, I do payment processing. And then, what the hell am I going to talk about? But everything, whether it's copywriting, offer creation, buying trial, it always leads to having strong payment processing and making sure the payment, and all the best offer owners know this. And this is their secret sauce, is knowing how to structure your merchant accounts, how to, distribute things and currencies and all this stuff. It's such a huge competitive advantage. And I think as, the economy maybe constricts or things kind of change around a little bit, people have less money. This is what's going to be the difference maker for people who make a lot of money and the people who kind of get, obviously offer creation, all that. But if you have that as a basis, and a lot of people have great offers, a lot of people know how to buy traffic, then you have to look at tech, right? To see what can make a big difference. So I'm happy that you gave me like a little bit of a promo there. Cause I'm like, people always say, well, what's the difference? I'll just get a merchant account. I'm like, no, there's a difference. If you get a merchant account in Canada and you use it for US traffic, you're not going to convert that well.
Yeah, no, exactly. And I mean, also how you set up the merchant account. I'm just going to say mids. So
yes, that's what we call them, mids. Everybody who's in the know calls them mids. So go ahead.
Yeah. So it's how you set up the mids, how you route them based off bin numbers and all this other stuff, which you know all about and you could get into. But so there's some tech involved there. Like I have a friend of mine who he was heading up the tech for like a $400 million straight sale operation in Nutra. And a lot of it had to do with like he would use machine learning to route bins and all this stuff to, credit card numbers to certain ones because the processing would go up and then you'd have a 5% increase in your approval rates. Yeah. And at that scale, that's a lot of money, right? Just from optimizing that. So, yeah, I mean, so that was, I started in the Canadian market. I was able to get merchant accounts. Eventually we did some in the US market, but I mean, we scaled very high in the Canadian market. We sold to basically 1% of Canada's population.
Wow.
So we had like well over 300,000 customers. That business did about 47 million or so over about 2.5 years.
Awesome.
So that was where we were. We did a bit in the US as well. I was always like worried about the US with like compliance issues and things like that.
Everybody's always scared. Like if I do something wrong, I might as well be in Canada or somewhere else, not in the States. But it's not that, it's not necessarily that you're doing something wrong or whatever, but there is FTC and so forth. And sometimes, I mean, just in the space that I'm in, that I see a lot of merchants and I see a lot of people, with different offers. Sometimes it's affiliates, for example, you get the wrong affiliates, they do something wrong. And then ultimately you're responsible. You may not have been watching too closely and you're just making the money. And then it's like, oh my gosh, like they were promising people like free iPhones if they bought for me. And, all that's like done at a smaller scale now. I think it's a little bit whatever, but as a business owner, you are ultimately responsible for any sales that come into your funnel. So if your affiliates are misselling you, there you go. You can, you can get into some pretty bad trouble. So, so why did you decide to go to the US then? What was the main reason?
I just wanted to diversify actually. Okay. And what was a big part of it was, around that time, Castle law, which was the privacy laws in Canada, they really restricted the ability to email your customers. Like you needed, basically it came to like, I had 300,000 customers and about 600,000 partials, and I couldn't email them because of the way Castle law came in. If I wanted to adhere to that law, I wasn't able to email them because they didn't give me express consent, even though the law wasn't in place at that time. It was the weirdest thing. So I basically just had to like forget about those prospects. And to give you some context, when I would send an email out to my trial list promoting another offer, we would get like, a couple hundred sales just from that one email drop. Like it was a big part of back-end revenue in a trial operation. And so we just couldn't do it anymore. So in the US is a opt-out jurisdiction when it comes to CAN spam law and whatnot. And it's one of the only ones in the world like that. So it gave a big bump in terms of margin and whatnot.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah, and the processing thing helped, but eventually I was able to start using the US mids for Canada as well.
Okay. Yeah. Well, I mean, that's interesting that, the US is giving you, or, having your US mids or going to the US, sorry, I'm losing my trail of thought, but going to the US opened up, an email marketing kind of stream of revenue that was not available in Canada, which is pretty crazy. So, I mean, I find that in the US, it's funny because a lot of the laws are a lot laxer than everywhere else in the world, but people seem to be more scared to operate in the US, because I guess, I don't know, there's a lot of federal bodies that are scarier sounding than anywhere else, I guess.
Yeah, no, you know what? So, without going in a lot of detail, it's like, you actually, when you're the big fish in a smaller market, you're much more visible from a legal standpoint, compliance and that sort of stuff. You have to audit your affiliates much more. And whereas in the US, our volume would not really be a big blip on the radar compared to a lot of the advertisers down here.
Okay.
And so it's, even at 47 some million, like there's guys that just crush that. They're doing 10x that in the US market. And also the other thing is, it's not very cut and dry in the US in terms of legal compliance, right? So as long as you're kind of adhering to your standard and whatnot, what affiliates do, yes, it can still get you in trouble, and affiliates we'll do stuff, but you have a lot more leeway, right?
Okay.
In terms of, I mean, obviously it's not legal advice, but I'm just saying. And then you have the email side of things. Like the data side of things in the US is such an advantage. Like if I was to do it again, I'd have a cheaper price trial. I would do things without trying to scale super, super hard like I did back then. I'd do it in the US, but the data side of the business, the back end, the emailing, the selling of data, all that's fully legal and compliant in the US. And that's actually where a lot of the ROI would come.
Oh, nice. So, I mean, you touched upon a couple of interesting things. So you said, if you had to do it over again, obviously the landscape of free trial in terms of compliance, legal stuff, laws change slowly, but they have changed. Tell me a little bit about a couple of lessons that you learned. I'm assuming you did free trial, like the old model of like $1.95 or under $5 for the initial, and then like $80, $90 for the rebuild 14 days later. That was a very traditional kind of way. So how have things changed, and what are the lessons that you learned that can maybe make that model kind of work in today's world?
Yeah, for sure. So the first one is not everyone says like, know your numbers, but what they don't think of is if you are getting a lot of merchant accounts, the rate card pricing, and you know this better than anyone, the rate card pricing that they give you, the fees, like the interchange fees and the actual costs for the mids, is different than what the effective rate becomes. And that's a huge thing. That was something that, like, especially with the international merchant accounts, that's something that sideswiped me like early on. We're like, oh, okay, 6% rate or whatever it was. That's what we're going to do. But when you effectively backed it out, it was at like a 15% rate.
Wow.
So yeah. So like we were just getting destroyed on these bank fees. Like, so, in this day and age, right, if you're going to do a trial, the first thing that, I mean, and this is just my opinion, there's other people that would probably run it harder or do it different ways. I would do it where the trial, first of all, is a lot cheaper, right? So I would find, and we were actually very transparent with it, like in our terms and everything, but I would still make the trial cheaper. I would potentially do like a free plus shipping for a book or similar on the front end, actually. And then on the back end is where I would put supplements, right? Because that kind of opens up the traffic networks a lot more because you're selling information, right? That's just one option. I've seen it successfully these days working like that. From a subscription side of things, I would do, again, like fair price. Like, what's the supplement cost? If it's like a $30 supplement or $40 supplement, that's fair, right? We pitch that. You do a little lower price because you're going to get a higher retention on average. And then I would also probably give the option of an info type membership. That could be like a $9.99, something we do in an e-com brand that I have, and in another, like an automotive, and then another e-com brand I have is like a VIP club type thing. Okay. It could be a bump offer on the checkout page. That's something that's like between $9.95 and $12, $13 per month. What it gives people free shipping on their initial order and then free shipping ongoing. So they just get a coupon code that they can always use for future orders. And then you can give like, information, membership type stuff, monthly ebooks, that sort of thing. The good thing about that is it's kind of a micro continuity, and it's a checkbox thing. So they have to opt in and all that sort of stuff. And they have very good stick rates, really, really good stick rates. So, and then you can actually use that as email like driven marketing later on, because you're like, hey, you're on the VIP club. Did you know that you still get 40% off all your future orders? Check out what we got now. So that's kind of the way that I would do it.
Okay.
Because knowing the numbers is like that rate card pricing, the mid thing is something that's brutal. Adding to that, I'd probably stick with domestic merchant accounts. To give you an idea, like when we shifted our portfolio to like 80, 90% international, that was when that business started crumbling. And then eventually, yeah, for sure. We were very, very profitable when we had about 40 to 50% of our merchant processing going through US mids. If I had 100%, like a lot of guys do, that business would have been a walk in the park in terms of like profitability and cash flow. The other lesson I learned was there's a cost for fast onboarding of mids. I don't know how fast you onboard mids, but the guys who are making the promises with the international mids where they can get you spun up in a week or whatever, a week or two, those were the ones that ended up costing me the most when it came to reserves not getting paid out, fees, all that sort of stuff. Yeah. So take the time with scaling. That's such an important thing. Don't worry about tacking on as much processing as possible if guys are promising you that. I mean, we had over 1.5 million of reserves that just weren't paid out to us. Right.
Wow. And I mean, people don't realize this. And I didn't know, obviously, a lot about payment processing, which I didn't know we were going with the conversation, but like one of the biggest things that when merchants are like, oh, I need to, get some more money, I need cash flow, whatever. I'm like, how much reserves are your processors holding? And 9 times out of 10, they're holding way more than they should be. Yeah. Or they have a 6-month rolling, but guess what? They haven't been rolling the reserve after the 6 months. Nobody's noticed. So they're just taking 10% off your top for long time. So, I mean, the lesson here for me, at least, is when you said know your numbers, is look at your merchant processing statement. A lot of people just never look at it. I'm like, you got to look at it and understand what's being charged, what's being held, how much is coming back. Because at the end of the day, if, one mistake happens, for example, where they hold your reserves without paying them out, that is 10% of your top line revenue that's gone. You know what I mean? This is a lot of money. So if you're 20% or 30% profitability, that's half or a third. They're basically, a business partner of yours, your processor. So you have to make sure, it comes back to data, it comes back to intelligence, it comes back to reconciliation. But I did want to just quickly mention, we have a lot of listeners who are maybe newer to the space and kind of getting their feet wet and stuff like that. This is, I feel like, advanced basics, get your offer to scale to 50, 60K a month, and then start kind of looking at this. For now, just kind of get a mid, get whatever you got to do, and just make some money. When you get to 50 or 60K, listen to this episode with Chad again and make sure that you follow all these rules. And then, obviously reach out to me and I'll explain how you can get a good mid strategy. But, it's funny how, again, the conversation comes back to data, comes back to merchant accounts, comes back to your top line. But I don't know who's selling you mids for 6%, Chad. It's that's high. So that's just besides the point. That's just a little kind of note, but I do have kind of maybe a little bit of a newbie question. And I'm just curious, when you buy a list, I mean, just because a lot of people offer me to sell me lists. So I have lists, 1,000 people and 10,000 people. I just find that a lot of these, how do you know it's a quality list? How do you know if this is decent? Is it by price point? Is it just kind of people that or what's the kind of methodology there?
Yeah. So a lot of times, we're getting this data from people we know, right? Okay. You don't really know if it's quality until you test it. But that being said, we'll use certain tools like email oversight. There's, Zero Bounce. There's another one that's pretty well known, where we'll always run the data before bringing it into our own ESP. We'll always run the data through that. And those platforms will identify valid, verified leads. They'll identify ones that are bots, spam traps, that sort of stuff. So you make sure that you don't mail to those. We only mail to the verified first, that are we know their real email addresses. So that's just a first step of due diligence that we do. And then after that, since we're mailing so much every month, we can put that data in slowly into our ESP accounts. And it's not an issue if it just starts bouncing and whatnot, because it blended into our overall volume, kind of mid blending and whatnot, but similar type of idea where if that data doesn't do well, it won't doesn't open or click well, it won't affect our overall ecosystem. Right. Okay. And so that's
it's harder for somebody who's starting then, right? Because they don't have the proven data. They have to almost cross their fingers that their lists are good and stuff like that. So, I mean, I guess, would you recommend that you build your own list to a certain point before you start buying lists?
Yeah, but I mean, it's really just the metrics, right? If you're somebody that's good at getting good quality data from people, and you just start slowly testing it, right? You start to see, because if you go to an ESP, we use a lot of dedicated IP pools. So dedicated IPs and that sort of thing. But if you go to an ESP on a shared IP pool and you just slowly start trickling it in, it's actually in a way advantageous because in the beginning, you're relying on the IP reputation of the rest of the ESP's ecosystem. So in the beginning, it can be good. And then as you start getting a lot bigger, it's good to move over to dedicated for the opposite reason. Because if you're still on shared and you're pretty high volume mailer, you could have people on this shared IP pool that just start doing some really rough stuff. And that affects your deliverability. Okay. So that's when you want to start moving over to a dedicated. We run both. We run hybrid, basically. We run dedicated and shared. But in the beginning, as a noob, if you want to call it that, buying the list, you can start to see the metrics slowly. It's just about bringing the data in slowly. It's not like you're going to put it all in and then just blow up the whole account. Yeah. And if you do, it's a shared account anyway, but you just usually
you don't want to do that to your shared friends though. But yeah, no, I get what you're saying. Like it's kind of like you have to go slowly and just kind of, build your reputation, just like with anything. I mean, if we're talking about email with media buying, you're not going to go, if you have a budget of like 10 grand, you're not going to go day one, 10 grand, right? You're going to split it up, try to learn your lessons, so same kind of thing. So, I mean, obviously you know a lot about email. So I'm actually really happy that you educated me on that a little bit, because I'm also like, we're doing the podcast, we're doing a lot of stuff, but the email list has always been something that's on my, it's on my mind. I have a lot of emails because of people who come through our funnel. So these are just ours, people who are interested, but I'm always worried just to start mailing, because it's obviously fear of the unknown, and trusting somebody with a list is also hard. And that, obviously because of all your experience in email, I did want to talk a little bit about idengine.com, which is another project of yours, which, I mean, I don't know much about email, but I know, some basics, I would say. And I thought this was a really neat solution, and just like, wow, like I didn't even know something like this existed to this scale. Right. So just to give the audience a little bit of background. So ID Engine essentially is a place or a system, a software that will allow you to capture visitors, your visitors' email addresses seamlessly, right? Is that kind of, but you say 70%, because there are other services out there that have this type of, promise, but you're saying you're going to get about 70% of the people who abandon the page, you'll get their email. So can you tell me, I that's obviously a very, kind of not experienced description of your product. Can you tell me a little bit about it? Just because it's obviously very unique.
Yeah, for sure. So, typically, it's called what's called an identity resolution platform. And typically those platforms will only match at most maybe 25% of the site visitors you have to an opt-in email address. So it's kind of like you have 100,000 visitors a month to a website. At most, they'll usually get you is 20 to 25,000 emails. With ID Engine, we're typically between 50 and 70%. We actually have a couple clients that are like 80%, 81%. And so that's essentially, 100,000 visitors, you can get up to 70,000 emails on average. So the way that we do it, like without getting too much into secret sauce, is we kind of aggregate several different upstream data providers. And so that's one reason why we have a better shot at matching who that person is. So all of us, we all have cookies, we all have browsing history, we have all that sort of stuff. We've opted in onto tons of different pages and publisher sites and that sort of thing. And that's essentially how we match it. We kind of have a very good picture of the person's identity and who they are and their email, what their buying patterns are, all this sort of stuff. Yeah. And then we match that to a publishing network of sites and where those people have opted in. And then you might have 5 different email addresses that identity, that person is opted into. Then it comes down to this whole kind of cleaning process and all this stuff that we do, which is kind of like proprietary on how we get a really high quality email address at the very end. So, all stripped down, the promise is that, essentially, if like I say, if you have 100,000 visitors a month, we can usually deliver between, I'd say 45,000 to 70,000 valid opt-in email addresses. All of them are checked for recency, that they've opened an email in their inbox within the last 10 to 20 days. So they're all very active emails as well. And we scrub them for, legal reasons, like people who have opted out on other lists or screamers and all that, all that sort of stuff. So we make sure the final data we're delivering is as strong as possible. So,
oh, wow. So does it, I mean, just curiosity, and I don't want you to reveal anything too proprietary, but like, obviously I'm assuming that depending on the browser, it could be like if more people are on Chrome or Safari, or, is there a browser that's kind of preferred for this type of service to be able to kind of gather this information for you? Like if most of your people are on Chrome, for example, does that work better?
no, not necessarily. Well, I guess the inverse of it is more Safari on mobile has a little bit lower match rate. So you do. So I guess the best way to say it is, like, if you have a lot of Facebook traffic coming right to your site and whatnot, that might have a slightly lower match rate. But at the same time, I mean, we haven't been seeing lower than 45%, 40%. Like overall, we've been pretty strong with how we've been able to match it. And so browser hasn't been a big thing for us. Okay. The guys who are hitting above 80%, like, which we don't even claim that we can do, but the guys that are doing that, a lot of them have email traffic hitting. Right. And so very high engaging email traffic. A lot of them are in the same conservative political space that we are. So I kind of know where they're getting that traffic, and that traffic tends to be tagging a little higher, but they're all opening. Like the craziest thing you'll see is that the open rates and the click rates are very similar to what opt-ins would be. Like it's very close. It's very odd.
Really?
Well, it was odd when we started developing it several months ago. And when we started, tweaking it and testing it, and then I optimized it to revenue per lead versus just optimizing to opens and clicks. But we noticed the behavior is very similar. So if I was to go to a political newsletter site and pay for an email drop, I could see the open rates, what those drops are. If we grab those leads, the open rates on ours are very similar.
Yeah. Nice. Wow. Yeah. That's so, I mean, this is just another way. And I actually, for me, let's say an email drop versus this, if the data is good, this is somebody who's visited your site. So there's already also some like brand recognition. There could be some kind of like, sometimes like, I have a son and I get distracted and I'm about to buy something and it's like, oh, I just like, oh, and then you just forget. Right. So, a nice little reminder of like, hey, what's going on? Or, I could see how that would be, the open rates would be similar because there is, we're always distracted, right? So that a phone call comes in, or, your kid drops something, or somebody's talking to you and so forth. So I think that's pretty genius. And I never, not that I never studied email to this extent, but as things change a lot with like iOS and Facebook being so strict and so forth, everybody seems to be kind of focusing on the email avenue or a little bit more. I feel like email was is becoming the new kid in town again. It was like obviously the beginnings of direct response was always email based, and that that was one of the only tools. And then it kind of went away because Facebook and YouTube and all that kind of stole its thunder, and now email is back. Like it's just people are back into like learning. Not that it ever went away. It just feels like it's kind of living a renaissance, I guess, or whatever.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I love SMS, for example, right? I love SMS traffic on my e-commerce stores. SMS is such a good revenue driver, but SMS is like, if you're going to do it compliantly, and I really recommend you do because TCPA laws are really rough. It's kind of limited. You have to get SMS opt-ins. There's just there's not many ways around it, that you're going to do that are risk-free. Whereas on email, I mean, everything at ID Engine, everything that we do there, it's fully compliant with like CAN-SPAM law and also all the US privacy laws. You don't use it internationally because international, they have a whole different privacy setup. So like our pixel doesn't even activate on international traffic. That way we avoid that entirely. So emails, like you're saying, SMS is awesome. I love it. It works so well. It's expensive, but it always ROIs, but it's so limited on what you can do outside of just the direct, opt-in, the SMS opt-in. Right. So, I optimized ID Engine off of our e-commerce store. So kind of like an abandoned cart type series, but we have guys who have VSL offers where they fire the ID Engine pixel like 10 minutes into the VSL. so that, they're not getting a bunch of traffic that's not interested.
Oh, nice. Yeah.
They're only, so there's all sorts of stuff you can do with it. Affiliates who have advertorials, like when somebody scrolls 80%, that's when they fire it. So there's a whole bunch of things that, you can do. It's pretty cool. And I think it's going to be a big advantage for people now that like ad rates are going up and you have just costs going up in general. The ID engine costs are like pretty minimal. So.
Oh, wow. Well, I mean, I like that you said that the interesting thing, and this is, sometimes something people forget. I had an episode recently with somebody who was talking about video, and, he was saying, we were talking about going viral versus, kind of targeted traffic. And I like what you just said is that, you don't want to necessarily fire a pixel in the first second and then somebody drops off and then you get crappy email addresses, then your bounce rates are higher, then your open rates are lower. Everything's kind of, you might as well cut that to like 10% of actually people who are there. You're going to get more qualified buyer, more open. So, I think at the end of the day is, as targeted as your traffic is, the better it is, because you're just, if you have 100 customers, 99 buy, that's much better than 10,000 visitors and one buys, right? So, it's a good thing that, obviously ID Engine has this flexibility and you can do a lot of different stuff. So I will talk a little bit more about it and also to people in the industry. And also I want to research it a lot. I've never heard of something this, like I've heard of obviously capture stuff, but I haven't heard of something being this effective. So I'm actually looking forward to hearing about your progress. So Chad, thank you so much. This was, we went from mids to email to free trial. Like, I mean, you know a little bit about everything. So that's pretty awesome. And, 10 years or 10, 12, a handful of years seems, to me, at least, I guess maybe my age, I'm aging myself. It's a short amount of time to know about all this stuff. You know what I mean? Usually careers are built over 25, 30 years with somebody that has so much experience. You went from, fighting in MMA and stuff like that to now kind of knowing everything about marketing. So thanks so much for appearing on my show. I really appreciate it. And everybody, if you want to get in touch with Chad or kind of look up all the different products and services, I'm going to have some links down below. Feel free to reach out to me if you want to get in contact with Chad. And thanks so much for your time, Chad.
Definitely. It was a pleasure.
Hope you found today's session valuable. If you have any questions for me or just want to connect, please feel free to visit my website, mariasparagas.com. That's MariaSparagis.com. I'd love to hear what you're working on, so drop me a line on any hot button issues your business is experiencing. And remember, don't worry about failure. You only have to be right once.